Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to today's Medical Center Hour. I'm Marcia Day Childress from the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Humanities here in the School of Medicine. We're delighted to see all of you here today for what is actually our final Medical Center Hour program of the fall semester. Our program is titled Voices in Remembrance of the 1918 Influenza, Ellen Bryant Voigt's Kyrie. The influenza pandemic of 1918-1919 was a global calamity that brought death on an unprecedented scale and intensified the impact of World War I, even as the armistice was signed 100 years ago this past Sunday. Statistics tell the grim tale of this flu in one way. Science tells it in another. But this Medical Center Hour, our third marking the pandemic's centenary, lets poetry speak to the human toll exacted by the 1918 H1N1 virus. In 1995, the distinguished poet and Virginia native Ellen Bryant Voigt published Kyrie, a collection of poems in which small-town speakers live through the harrowing epidemic and remember, defy, and mourn. Powerfully, hauntingly, Kyrie brings the global calamity home. In this Medical Center Hour, Ellen Bryant Voigt, on pre-recorded video and on speakerphone, reads selections from Kyrie. She's on speakerphone from St. Paul, Minnesota, and she'll be discussing with fellow poet and friend Marianne Boruch and with us the making and meaning of her American masterpiece. Here in Charlottesville with us, seated at the front desk, is Marianne Boruch, who will guide our engagement with Kyrie. She's a professor emerita of English and creative writing at Purdue University. I need to mention that neither of our speakers had any conflicts of interest to declare. UVA Bookstore has copies of Kyrie available in the upstairs lobby. And let me quickly thank Historical Collections in the Claude Moore Health Sciences Library, whose History of the Health Sciences lecture this is, and the Buring Center for Nursing Historical Inquiry. Both have been our partners this fall for the mini-series Influenza 1918 to 2018. Now please welcome Marianne Boruch and Voices in Remembrance of the 1918 Influenza. Marianne.
Well, the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 was a most terrible event that began with a medical mystery. An ordinary flu or just pneumonia? Why so many stricken in midlife and so quickly? In some towns and cities, it was a good third of families in America to wipe out thousands, and it spread worldwide. Since then, it's been pretty much forgotten. What continues? Facts and figures. Then you've been hearing about that in the other presentations, right, in this series. But it falls to the poet to find a very human story. Ellen Voigt's Kyrie is stunning, heart-stopping, fierce, immense, and characteristically unsentimental, a backdrop to tragedy, to what the world never wanted and could barely bear. Each piece of this book-length sonnet sequence is a window into that stricken time, each heard, spoken by those who survived or did not survive, with pieces that soar out and above, giving us a precise and chilling overview. And they are, loosely or not, written as sonnets, our oldest, most treasured, though often maligned, poetic form. After a while, I wanted them all to be sonnets, Ellen has said, both for the necessary resistance to pathos and also they'd have equal time at the mic, and to see how far I could bend the expectations of meter, rhyme, even the placement of the volta. Why not, I figured, do one that put the couplet in the middle? The poets gradually obsessed her. It got to the point, she said, where I was writing Kyrie poems in my sleep. And the book carries what she calls the white-hot lyric center of influenza, each with different speakers. And I would add, it's person by person, loss by loss, until we, readers and listeners, are carried, overwhelmed, changed. Mark this, Kyrie is brilliant. an American masterpiece, one of the finest, most hypnotic, thrilling collections of poems to come out of the 20th century. This is not hyperbole. Unfortunately, as you heard, Ellen is in St. Paul, Minnesota right now, but I assure you she is here, I swear it, listening through speakerphone. And last week, her most resourceful daughter, Dudley, filmed her reading several pieces from Kyrie for us. So we will see those readings. We'll stop them now and then to allow her to tell us about their making, and toward the end of the hour, you will be able to ask her questions. First, a crucial early poem from the book.
To be brought from the bright schoolyard into the house, to stand by her bed like an animal stunned in the pen. Against the grid of the quilt, her hand seems stitched to the cuff of its sleeve, although he wants most urgently the hand to stroke his head, although he thinks he could kneel down, that it would need to travel only inches to brush like a breath his flushed cheek. He doesn't stir. All his resolve, all his resources go to watching her mouth, her hair a pillow of blackened ferns. He means to match her stillness, bone for bone. Nearby, he hears the younger children cry, and his aunts, like careless thieves, out in the kitchen.
So, Ellen, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You once wrote me that this particular piece was the triggering poem for the entire collection. And we know that the Spanish flu is not just an American calamity, but it's spread worldwide. Still, for a poet, especially a lyric poet, a personal, private entry is crucial. Will you tell us about the origin of this small narrative, the boy at his stricken mother's bedside? Who was that boy outside of the poem? This is a family story, isn't it?
Yes. That was actually my father. And his mother did not die in the epidemic, but died in stillbirth. When he was only 8, this was a fact that we knew. We always remembered that piece of information, but it did not occur to me until my own son was 8, exactly how young he was. And he was sent away to live with the cousins, and the cousins were only age 19 and age 20. So yes, it did seem to me, when I thought about it, that this particular epidemic, it caused a whole generation of orphans, that his story was not the only one. And I grew up in a very small town in Virginia where there were other local people. And in fact, the doctor who is referred to is one who delivered my father. My father is named for him. So yes, that is the very beginning of the whole sequence.
Right, and that doctor that delivered your father, he's a very important speaker in the book as well, and right from the start. And so those were family stories that you heard as a child. I think we need to hear some poems through the doctor's point of view, so we can hear what it's like to be a village doctor at that time during this epidemic. So we're going to play those right now, Ellen.
Circuit rider, magic leather credential at my feet, with its little vials of morphine and digitalis. I made my rounds 4 days at a stretch out from the village, in and out of their houses, and in between, in sunlight, moonlight, nodding on the hard plank of the buggy. It didn't matter which turn the old horse took. Illness flourished everywhere in the county. At the Foxes, the farmhouse doors were barred by snow. They prized a board from a window to let me in. At one adult already dead, the other too sick to haul the body out. When it was time to move, he didn't move. He lay athwart his mother. She pushed and pushed. She'd had a stone before. She wanted a child. Reaching in, I turned him like a calf. Rob gave her a piece of kindling wood. She bit right through. I turned him twice. Her sisters were all in the house. Her brother home again on leave. In the months to come, in the cities, there would be families reported their terminals and fled. Volunteers would have to hunt the dying door to door. It started here with too many breech and stillborn, women who looked 50, not 32. I marked it childbed fever in my log. Deep in the lungs, a cloudiness not clearing, vertigo, nausea, slowed heart, thick green catarrh, nosebleeds, spewing blood across the room, as if it had conscripted all disease. Once, finding a jug of homemade corn beneath the bed where a fevered family lay head to foot in their own and the others' filth, I took a draught and split the rest among them, even the children, these the very children named for me, who had pulled them into the world. It was the 4th day, and my bag was empty. Small black bag I carried like a Bible.
Well, you know, I love these poems. So the doctor keeps recurring throughout the book, and he has a grounding voice and sequence, and emotionally and narratively he runs out of medicines and so on. And I remember you told me one time that you wanted a figure in the book who was ironic, that irony was a really hard thing for you, as you said, because I'm such an earnest person. And so, but you wanted a figure, and I remember you wrote in a letter, whose life circumstances were such that irony was imperative to survival, to coping, to keeping sane. And I think now, surely the flu epidemic, especially for a physician, was a most horrendous circumstance. And I'm wondering what you think about that now, like that notion of irony, but also in these 3 poems, the sort of sample poems from the doctor, were there images that really, you know, keep haunting you? I mean, I think about that last one, you know, the moonshine, the homemade corn liquor, everybody just, there's no medicine, so even the kids are drinking it. Like, it's a strange sort of toast in the middle of an epidemic. But were there certain images that really haunted you, and that notion, or you can talk about that notion of irony in someone like the doctor?
Yes. Well, you also asked about the lamb and cutting the cat's throat, and that's of course a biblical reference. It's nothing real, I guess, but it is real in that I just imagined it. I imagined that this is what could have happened, and I thought about the sequence just as another person who might have survived that time. And some of those, the shiny, swollen, shiny, green, black, green-eyed flies get free through the window and carry off the sickness. That haunted them.
Right, yeah. And that of course, those are kind of other do-it-yourself medications, right? And sort of social cultural customs to treat disease at the time.
Yes.
Right. Well, maybe we should hear those. I mean, those two. There's two like that talk about sort of home cures, beyond the doctor, to stuff people did for themselves. And that would be, yeah.
You wiped a fever brow, you burned the cloth. You scrubbed a sick room floor, you burned the mop. What wouldn't burn, you boiled like applesauce, out beside the shed in the copper pot. Apple, lightwood, linen, feather bed. It was the smell of that time, that neighborhood. All night the pyre smoldered in the yard. Your job, to obliterate what had been soiled. But the bitten heart no longer cares for risk. The Orthodox still passed from lip to lip the blessed relic and the ritual cup. To see in the pile the delicate pillow slip she'd worked by hand, roses and bluets, as if hope could be fed by giving up. How we survived. We locked the doors and let nobody in. Each night we sang, ate only bread and a bowl of buttermilk, boiled the drinking water from the well, clipped our hair to the scalp, slept in steam, rubbed our chests with camphor, backs with mustard, legs and thighs with fatback, and buried the rind. Since we had no lambs, I cut the cat's throat, X'd the door, and put the carcass out to draw the flies. I raised an upstairs window and watched them go, swollen, shiny, black, green-backed, green-eyed, fleeing the house, taking the sickness with them.
Yeah, and there's your flies that you mentioned a little earlier, right? The flies taking the sickness with them, and that long stretch of swollen, shiny, green-black, green-eyed flies, somehow lifting the sickness from the house. That clearly haunts you, and certainly haunts any of us who read that, I think, or who know that poem. So you did a lot of research, I know, for this book about the flu epidemic. So could you talk about that a little bit, like that thing about the flies, or about the blood, sort of biblical reference there to the lamb's blood on the doorway, so the angel of death passes by, but you don't have a lamb, so you do the cat, poor cat. But so can you talk about that, like you did research for this in a way that mostly we poets don't do research for poems. We write essays and so on, but we don't usually research poems. Can you talk about your research for this book? And did these directives come out of that research in some way?
Yes, well, I did research because my wonderful editor at Norton was the one who encouraged me to continue to write about this. And I was very concerned. I thought, well, nobody wants to read that. Somebody gets sick and they either die or they don't die. That's that. So she was the one who encouraged me, and it's Kyrie poems include her cover art, which shows the sun being eaten in the eclipse. So.
Yeah, and well, of course, your own experience in Vermont and also in Virginia, you have a lot of, you know a great deal about the natural world. Growing up on a farm and living out in the country in Vermont for so many years. So I assume that all that came into the book, too. You were drawing from that. So I think, just to step back a bit, maybe we should hear you read more about misery. This is human suffering is a great subject here, and I won't ask you any questions about it. But if we could hear 22 and 68, that'd be great.
Nothing would do but that he dig her grave under the willow oak on high ground, beside the little graves, and in the rain, a hard rain and wind, enough to tear a limb from the limber tree. His talk was wild, his eyes were polished stone, all of him bent laboring to breathe, even iron bends. His face ash by the time he came inside. Within the hour, the awful cough began, gurgling between coughs, and the fever spiked as his wife's had done. Before a new day rinsed the window pane, he had swooned, was blue. He stands by the bed, he sits beside the bed, he lays his unfledged body on the bed where she had laid him. If he'd had the right words in his prayer, if he'd stayed awake all night, if he'd been good, been wise, perhaps he could have brought her back, the way she drew him out of his dark moods, guitar in her lap, her hair lace and shadow on her cheek. In the hard-backed book, propped open by the lamp, the shape notes swarmed like minnows on the page. She had said their lives were scripted there. Nearby, someone feeds the treasonous baby. She lied is the first verse of his new life.
You know, that really brings home the whole notion of, you were saying before about the stillbirths and how they increased during this period, and the great tragedy of that. I want to think about, draw you into thoughts about narrative and lyric, again, and the whole narrative thing. The doctor supplies a narrative, and there came a point, I know, that you've told me that, you had so many details and so many speakers, and it was too much variation, and so you wanted to, so that's when I invented, how do you put it, that's when I invented the soldier and the letters. And so throughout this book, there are letters from the front, from Price, who is engaged to Maddie, who's the school teacher, that supplies a narrative thread in these lyric poems. So this is kind of a structural idea, but it's also brings such humanity to the book. We'll hear a couple of poems. First, a Maddie poem. She's cast here as a school teacher, I think 3rd grade, and then one of the letters from the front, from Price, who writes to her, and we can hear that.
All day, one room, me and the cherubim with their wet kisses. Without quarantines, who knew what was happening at home? Was someone put to bed? Had someone died? The paper said how dangerous. They coughed and snuffed in their double desks facing me. They sneezed and spit on books we passed around and on the boots I tied, retied, barely out of school myself. Price at the front. They smeared their lunch. They had no handkerchiefs, no fresh water to wash my hands. When the youngest started to cry, flushed and scared, I just couldn't touch her. I let her cry. Their teacher, and I let them cry. Dear Maddie, though you don't tell of troubles there, meaning to buy me peace, I would suppose. Dreadful word goes around, families perished or scattered. I remind myself Pug's mother died from having him, and he thought orphans saved themselves some time in the scheme of things. Won't a future happiness be ransomed by present woe? Dear Maddie, it's you I think of when I say my prayers, your face. It's you I'll want when I get back from this, just like the night that I said marry me and you said yes, and the moon came out from behind the cloud as I had wished it to, and I kissed your mouth and then your chestnut hair.
Oh boy, so great. So these letters, back to the letters and that go on throughout this book. I'm wondering about when in that same note to me about those letters, you said that long sequence forced you to start thinking, quote, like a novelist, which is to say, back up before the crisis and extend past the crisis. And you needed a recurring character and a retrievable timeline. And as I sort of suggested before, you said too many voices, too much variation might be a problem without this. Can you talk a little bit about the necessity for a bit of narrative for a lyric poet? I mean, a lot of lyric poets are like, no, keep narrative away from me. That is so old-fashioned. But I'm just wondering about that mix. And you have talked a lot in your life and your essays about the necessity of both song and story. And so, can you? I don't know. It really came to life, I think, those issues in this sequence. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes. I think I'm essentially a lyric poet, is to say I write by sound. I write off my ear. But what I have in mind about lyrics has to do with the intensity of feeling. It seems to me that intensity of feeling is what unites us all, and anybody's message is what is different. Anybody's own personal life story is what is how we are different. But that kind of intensity is hard to maintain. So yes, song and story, both at the same time. So it seemed important for this particular sequence to give it a try and not make it representative of something else. I knew right away that I didn't want this to be just these various stories, these speakers, to be variants of metaphor, even though I'm sure that the AIDS epidemic had a lot to do with this particular sequence. And I'm also sure that I had elegies to write for my parents. And so this was a way to do that. But it seemed really important to make sure that these stories were grounded not as this is like something else, or not as this is really about the HIV crisis, but instead this singular experience.
Right, that individuality you mean in the stories, and the fact that this particular story recurs, we follow it over time, really deepens that whole effect, I think. But you mentioned the song part, or how the ear is so important for you. You were, of course, trained as a musician, as a pianist, when you were young, and you still play. What's another kind of sound experiment in the book, I think, are where you take various popular forms and adapt them. And so we're going to hear, the prayer, the nursery rhyme, various things like that. So let's hear a couple of those. And you guys will recognize the kind of the mothership form here, I think, of these two.
The barber, the teacher, the plumber, the preacher, the man in a bowler, man in a cap, the banker, the baker, the cabinet maker, the fireman, postman, clerk in the shop, soldier and sailor, teamster and tailor, man shoveling snow or sweeping his step, carpenter, cobbler, liar, lawyer, laid them down and never got up. Oh, the world wouldn't stop. The neighborhood grocer, the neighborhood cop, laid them down and never did rise. And some of their children and some of their wives fell into bed and never got up. Fell into bed and never got up. This is the double bed where she'd been born. Bed of her mother's marriage and decline. Bed her sisters also ripened in. Bed that drew her husband to her side. Bed of the one child lost and 5 delivered. Bed indifferent to the many bodies. Bed around which all of them were gathered. Watery shapes in the shadows of the room. And the bed, frail abroad the violet ocean, the frightened beasts, so clumsy and pathetic, breathing their wet breath against her neck. She threw off the pile of quilts, white face like a moon, and then entered straightway into heaven.
Yeah, these are two I love as well. I mean, of course, that first one, the all fall down echo there from that I guess was part of the Black Plague, a reference to that kids would play endlessly after. And so it takes the flu epidemic and puts it in a more playful mode, kind of grimly so, and so you get that tension. And the wonderful bed poem with the imprint of all those bodies over many generations is, again, you're a master of the image, truly. That notion of finding the image and letting that direct the poem. And the power of simple repetition. So can you tell us about these forms? Because they really, they don't have they have individuality, but it seems like their aim is something different than a lot of the other poems that are directly tied to a speaker. How do you see them working in the book?
Yes, I think that mainly ironic is right, not as a issue of style at all, but as a way of coping.
Right, yeah, they are ironic. They have that edge, that playful edge to them, and that is a way of coping, a kind of distancing at the same time. That notion of sound, and your background as a musician. Let's hear another one, because this brings up a really interesting point that I heard you say once.
Oh yes, I used to pray. I prayed for the baby. I prayed for my mortal soul as it contracted. I prayed a gun would happen into my hand. I prayed the way our nearest neighbors prayed, head down, hands wrung, knees on the hard floor. They all were sick, and prayed to the merciful Father to send an angel, and my Henry came. The least of these my brethren, Henry said. Wherefore by my fruits, Henry said. All of them survived. Do you think they are still praying, thank you, Lord, for Henry? She was so tiny, we kept her in a shoebox on the cook stove, like a kitten.
And I remember you said that often lines come to you, or at least in this case it did, out of the blue. You heard that line, "Oh yes, I used to pray," and it leaped onto the page and sort of demanded that you write the poem. But you heard it, and then you said, "I would hear such a thing, and then I would figure out who said that." So the voice came first, and I thought that was really fascinating. And I wonder, does that happen to you a lot, where it's your imagination is first kind of is kicked in by sound? You hear something and you follow it? And do you think that has something to do with your origin, I guess, as a musician, playing the piano all those years?
I'm sure it does. I don't have that experience frequently enough, alas. I write very, very slowly, so it takes me a long time. But in this particular case, I had the sonnet form to help me, which was it was a guard against sentimentality, and it was also it was generative, highly generative.
Yeah, and of course you played with the sonnet form, as you said sometimes, what the hell, put the volta in the middle, the volta being that turn, the famous turn in the sonnet at the end of the sonnet, and yet,
Yes.
but you took great liberties in these pieces, right?
Yes. Well, when I was the state poet in Vermont, I had a wonderful opportunity to be part of a commissioned piece by the Vermont Symphony Orchestra.
Right.
And the director at that time was Jamie Laredo, who is a fantastic musician. He's a world-class violinist himself. And the commission was done by a guy I worked with who does choral music. So really he was stuck with, having to do narration. I helped him choose some poems, but, it had to be like Peter and the Wolf, so that there would be themes recurring. And I had one that I picked out for him to use, was one talking about what happens toward the end of the pandemic, when the various soldiers came back and reinfected populations. And in that poem, it says, after the pall withdraws, the world hums again, making its golden honey. And so what Laredo told the orchestra to do was simply hum. So after they finished playing, they just all hummed. It was extraordinary, an extraordinary gift to hear that.
So that was the thing that really surprised you about that adaptation of your poems, right?
Yes, it was. It was completely haunting. And it turns out that I hadn't realized when I went off to music school, I wrote another piece that was called Kyrie because it had an optional, I could do a divided line 4 against 3. So, Kyrie eleison, this day eleison, Kyrie eleison, that use of the seven beat line. So who knows, I might have ended up being a composer if I'd been in a school that focused more on composition,
Yeah. Huh.
less on performance.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought.
Yeah.
But you've never written music as such.
No. I've only written, the music that is commanded on page.
Right, and I know you have a wonderful grand piano in your house. That humming is curious, isn't it? That he brought that to life like that. I just love that story. And humming is so close to silence in a way, isn't it?
Yes.
So it was a way to really pause the orchestra. Well, let's hear 2 last poems here before we head into the Q&A from the audience here. So we'll do these 2.
What I remember best is my cousin's crow. He found it, fed it, splinted its damaged wing, and it came when he whistled it down, ate from his hand, said like a slow child what he had said. Emmett never used a leash or cage. For a year, it hulked in the big pine by the door or in the windmill's metal scaffold, descending for apple, a little grain, a little show. Once God gave out free will, I bet he was sorry. So much had been invested in the bird not understanding gratitude. Well, again, it turned up in the yard from time to time, no longer smart or amusing, no longer his, just another crow. Who said the worst was past? Who knew such a thing? Someone writing history. Someone looking down on us from the clouds. Down here, snow and wind, cold blew through the clappers. Our spring was frozen in the frozen ground. Like the beasts in their holes, no one stirred, if not sick, exhausted or afraid. In the village, the doctor's own wife died in the night of the 19th, 1919. But it was true. At the window, every afternoon, toward the horizon, a little more light before the darkness fell.
Well, some of those lines, I just feel this chill. Do you feel that? It's just so wonderful. Okay, Ellen, so now we're all going to hum. No, just joking. Okay, so we're going to ask the audience if they have questions. And John, how are we going to do this exactly? Oh, you're going to take that around. So
Okay.
Ellen,
So we're going to, I have a mic, and we'll move through the audience to capture their comments and questions. And just before we start, I would like to thank you, Marianne, and you, Ellen, for a wonderful combined presentation. And I want to say, Ellen, you have written music. You've written a beautiful requiem for the 1918 flu.
Nicely, yeah.
So we will turn now to questions and comments from the audience. And Ellen is with us, as you know, on speakerphone. You can direct your question to her. You can also direct it to Marianne, or both of them can answer. And please identify yourself before you ask your question or offer your comment.
Hi, Ellen. This is Danny Becker, one of your former students from Warren Wilson from 18 years ago. Over the years, I've probably given Kyrie to about 10, 20 of my students, usually during flu season. Can you tell us about Kyrie, the title? Where did that come from?
Did you hear that, Ellen?
Yes, the title. The title is part of the Mass, the Catholic Mass, and you're a musician, you know that it's a reference to that part of the movement. And it's Kyrie eleison. It actually comes from the Greek, and it's vocative, which is a way of saying, God have mercy. Christ have mercy. Oh, God have mercy. That's really the direct translation. So, Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison. That's what it comes from. And my wonderful editor kept telling me that she thought that should be explained somewhere, and I just resisted. I thought, no, people will know, but in fact, people didn't know unless they were Catholic or musicians. So that's where it comes from.
Yeah, that's the only bit of Greek in the Latin Mass. I mean, I remember that from my childhood. And
Yeah.
Other questions?
Other questions? It won't go on the video, though.
Hi, I'm Susie. I am curious to know how you decided that you were done with this subject matter after writing so many poems.
That's an excellent question. Once it was fixed in time, once I had the letters, I had the soldiers coming back. Then my challenge became to stop writing sonnets and get those out of my head. I had to move to something else. Otherwise, you move to mannerism. Then you're just writing the same kind of poem that you know you can write. So what you want to try to do is not do that, but to force yourself to learn something new. I mean, poetry is an intelligence. It's just like science. It gives you a way of understanding the world. And so it's as close as I've come to any kind of skydiving, but it must be like that. That you turn loose, and it's a perfect self-forgetfulness. So that's when you stop. It's also the other thing about the use of the form is that it can tell you enough already. Whereas some other instances, that's not the case. I don't know if you bake bread, but if you've ever made homemade bread, then you know there comes a time when the dough simply will not take any more flour. It just sheds it off and flakes. Won't take it. And so you have to stop kneading. That's the end of that procedure. And if you've done it with a sourdough starter, that's one way you can do it. And that's what, standard sequence essentially was. But it's very interesting to me that once I started reading some of these, and Marianne actually was among the first people to hear me read them. Once I started reading them, I had various people came up to me and said, "Oh yes, I do remember that. I remember Uncle so-and-so talking about it." Or I remember, and one person said, "I remember when we had to meet the train to bring all the bodies back. And we brought them back in big baskets." And he said, "You had to wait in line for all the hearses." And so he recalled it. And then he said this amazing sentence. This is a novel right here. His sentence was, "Oh yes, I know about that epidemic. The woman who was supposed to be my mother died in it." Doesn't that tell you everything? The woman who was supposed to be my mother. I thought that was remarkable.
And you did create out of this and out of those memories that these poems evoke. It does give rise to a chorus of memories, and we're now at 100 years, close to losing a lot of those live voices, even of the generation that lost parents. So the book is a real gift in this way, and creates an ongoing chorus as we all hum along. Marianne, any comments you have on that?
No, it's just a privilege to read this book and to talk to you today, Ellen, about it and have you read to us. We really appreciate you making those recordings. This has just been amazing.
Thank you, Marianne.
Could you?
It was great. It's great to be talking with you, and also just a reminder to everybody that Marianne's magnificent book, her Cadaver.
Well, I'm hoping you'll read one more poem, and I think we can crank it up here from the treasure trove you sent us to sort of finish off the presentation here.
Yeah, we're going to close with one last poem that also serves quite wonderfully and appropriately as the close to our trio of programs about the 1918 influenza, and answers the question that people often asked us about why do this series.
Why did you have to go back? Go back to that awful time, upstream, scavenging the human wreckage. What happened, or what we did or failed to do? Why drag us back to the ditch? Have you no regard for oblivion? History is organic, a great tree. Along the starched corduroy of its bark, the healed scars, the seasonal losses, so asymmetrical, so common. Why should you set out to count? Don't you people have sufficient woe?
So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Ellen Bryant Voigt, Dudley Voigt, who's been there helping, Marianne Boruch, and I again remind you, this is the last Medical Center Hour of the fall semester. Our programs resume on the 23rd of January. Yikes, 2019. See you then. Thank you.